Hello students, I am Dr. L.K. Das, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Department of HSS IIT Roorkee. Welcome to another lecture of the NPTEL course Power and Politics in Contemporary India, a Sociological View. In today's lecture, we will discuss a critique of the critique of the critique. What does that mean? It means that in the beginning of this week, we started with a critique of nation and nationalism, the way it has been understood or the way it was understood in the late 90s, late 70s, late 60s and late 70s. But the way it was created in the modern West, for example, the way Anthony Smith described it, the way Anderson described it, we had a critique of it in terms of whose imagination or whose imagined community of Partha Chatterjee. So today we are going to discuss G. Aloysius's work, in which he is not only critiquing the way nation and nationalism has been understood in the Indian context, but also the way the Partha Chatterjee has articulated it or critiqued the Western conceptualization. So what is the problematic that he is trying to address? For G. Aloysius, the first thing is that let us not look at nationalism only in terms of politics, rather let us look at it in terms of culture. So, if you are looking at culture, then what are the different dimensions of culture that we can look at? Similarly, what is the role of the nation state, what is the role of the dominant classes, what is the role of the subaltern masses within the idea of nation itself, he is arguing about. And the persistent question that and the prominent question that he has is, why did nationalism not yield a cohesive society? And he is speaking about the Indian context and he is not going outside of it. So let us start. Let us start with a theoretical premise in which Aloysius argues that nation is a congruence between culture and power. Now this is where he is in sync with Anderson's suggestion or Anderson's definition that nation is nothing but an imagined political community. If it is a community, that means that it is cultural, and if it is political, that means it is power. So nationalism, coming from this kind of a fused congruence, fuses cultural identity with political equality. So keep this in mind. Cultural identity and political equality. These are very crucial for today's discussion, and the way many sections of society in India have understood nationalism and nation. So there's a movement in terms of true nationalism, because a true form of nationalism would democratize both cultural identity and political equality. Political equality in what terms? In terms of we being the citizens of the country called India, in which as citizens we have equal rights. I will not get much into the question of citizenship today, because in next class we are going to discuss about citizenship anyways. So democracy is very significant for Aloysius. So for him, culture is significant, politics is significant, and democracy is significant, because democracy is the only way or only the mode of governance through which politics and culture are taken care of as equal the measures, or they are given equal weightage rather than giving significance to only one section while leaving the other aspect as it is. So when colonial nationalism arrived in India, it only provided an external sanction, which means that the colonial India or colonial British India, it galvanized different the principalities, different nationalities into one, and was called British India, which had a power center first in Calcutta and then it was shifted to New Delhi in the early part of 20th century. So this was quite nicely and quite efficiently done by the colonial nationalism. But what about cultural? In terms of the theory, Aloysius argues that internal hierarchies are something that no nationalist leader in the Indian context or no prominent nationalist leader in the Indian context wanted to discuss. Rather, what they wanted to do is that let us not bring our internal hierarchies and internal differences in front of an external force. Rather, we will discuss about it, we'll debate about it, we'll take care of it once we achieve independence. In the last class, we had discussed about Partho Chatterjee, in which Partho Chatterjee had also made a similar kind of an argument, in which he had claimed that through colonial difference, the leaders in India spoke about the inside and the outside. The outside being economy, the outside being modernization, the outside being industries, the outside being legalities, whereas women, other kind of groups, house, language, religion, customs, the culture, they were all part of internal aspects, in which the nationalist leaders in the 19th century, in the early part of 20th century, did not want the British to intervene. Whether it is widow remarriage or it is about the Sati Pratha, all of them were supposed to be taken care of by the nationalist leaders at the internal level. So, the argument that the Aloysius is bringing here is that by creating this cleavage between inside and outside, the problem that were happening inside were made invisible, and anybody who spoke about the internal dynamics or wanted an intervention from the state or the British colonial state on the internal dynamics were termed anti-national, were also termed as the people or agencies or the societies who don't want or who do not want India to become independent. And along with this theoretical construction, the methodological construction that Aloysius is using is called historical sociology. So he is not interested in looking at the political aspect as such or the political history as such. Rather, he wants to do a structural analysis of how society is changing and what are the societal dimensions and cultural dimensions that we can locate. So, when we look at the cultural dimensions or social dimensions of the nationalist movement, it gives us certain hints as to in which side of the platform who was standing. So, by bringing history and sociology together, you look at the internal dynamics in sociological terms regarding caste, regarding religion, regarding gender, regarding region, regarding cult, so on and so forth, and also language. In terms of history, it's not just a historical materialism that Marxists speak about or the transformation and transition that is happening. Rather, history here denotes who were the dominant classes or dominant groups, how they have transformed or transitioned their own communitarianism, as well as how they have come to power and how they have been able to mobilize themselves as well as the resources available to them through the state in order to reproduce the domination and power that they have in the Indian society. So, in this framework, when we look at the past, it helps us explaining the present. So, you can say that the present can also be studied as part of history, and this is very interesting. This is very interesting primarily because when we think of history, we usually think of what has happened in the past. We don't usually understand history in terms of what is happening in the contemporary period. in our own lives when we are still alive and in our own surroundings. So rather than that, he is also using something called sociological imagination, because if you are aware of it, then sociological imagination is about bringing one's biography and present and the broader context together. When you are bringing something and looking at something, looking at a perspective from a historical point of view, that essentially means that we are looking at the transitions and transformations or non-transitions and non-transformations that have happened in the history that we are looking at. It could be a small duration or it could be a certain section of a long period that is going on. So he is bringing here Gellner, Anderson and Anthony Smith's ideas in order to look at transition and transformation that is happening. And his focus is how do you look at cultural modernity and not just how state formation has happened, which was the case for Gellner as well as Anderson and Smith. So now let us come to the core arguments of Aloysius. He argues that British rule unified India territorially but divided it socially. Now, when you say that British rule unified India territorially but divided it socially, can we say that this is something that they did out of anger, out of some other kind of problem that they had, or it is because of some other reasons? The reasons could be numerous, because one of the key aspects is that the British were an external aggressor. So, they would like to understand how society functions and how Indian society is functioning or has been functioning. So, when they wanted to understand that, they created institutions, and in those institutions they hired the educated section of Indian society to work and to interpret the existing literature, existing scriptures and existing texts for the British, so that they could understand Indian society. And once it was done, the British helped in creation of certain modern institutions like legal institutions, educational institutions and print capitalism. So, when they created these institutions, they had a very specific reason for that, and the specific reason was that they wanted some of these individuals to get educated in law, in certain kind of English education and certain kind of technology, so that they can work for the British and for the propagation of British Empire in India. But at the same time, they also wanted a certain kind of service, the service groups, or they wanted to create a certain kind of groups who would be loyal to the British Raj, rather than being opposite to that, or rather than galvanizing the local population to fight against the British. So these institutions were creations for the British, creations of the British for the British rather than for the Indians. But while they were looking at the modern institutions and focusing on the modern institutions, the people who got educated, they wanted that now we have got certain idea as to how this institution of colonial Raj is running, and we are the ones who are running it. So we will take care of the how to run it and not have any further interference in the social structure or the social field. So that is the reason why Aloysius argues that the modern institutions of law, education and print capitalism did not have any impact on the traditional hierarchies in India. Rather, the governance structures that were created were quickly adopted by the upper caste groups in different sections, in different regions of India. So we could have certain upper caste in the north, we could have certain upper caste in the west, we could have certain upper caste in the east, we could have certain upper caste in the south. And each one of them, they wanted to replicate, or they wanted to reproduce their own hegemony or domination through reinterpretation of the scriptures, as well as getting attached to the colonial systems of power. So one key argument of Aloysius is that in the colonial modernity, while Western rationality was introduced in law, education and print capitalism, it had no impact on the Hindu orthodoxy, because as we have always read in our history textbooks, during the period of 1857, there were Hindus, there were Muslims, or they were from other religious affiliations. They had made Bahadur Shah Jafar as the Emperor of India, or the last Mughal emperor, because of which the British wanted to tackle both the Mughal Empire as well as the Muslims. And when they looked at different groups as well as the population of India, British India, they realized that the Hindus happen to be one of the key, or Hindus happen to be one of the key features of this continent or this subcontinent. And once we get hold of the upper castes, the Brahmins, the Kayas, the Kshatriyas, we can control this entire landmass without much force. So they wanted their domination to be converted to hegemony, and this hegemony would be constructed through the domination of the Hindu orthodoxy. So even when there was certain sense of reformism happened, it was within the society. There was no such adverse impact on the social, the inequalities that were already existent here. So when this was written down, or when the later day historians started writing about the interventions that were being made, the criticism that, or the critique that Aloysius has here is of all three groups: the nationalist historians, the Cambridge school, as well as the subaltern historians. The first two we have already discussed in the several classes about the nationalist historiography as well as the Cambridge school, or the imperialist historiography. The imperialist historiography is also called as the Cambridge school. So while they focused on factional politics, nationalist historiography focused on the elites and how these elites brought about a social transformation. So even when the subaltern studies started critiquing both the imperialist, the school as well historiography as well as nationalist historiography, for Aloysius, they subalterns spoke about elite appropriation of the voices of subalterns, or subjugation of the subaltern voices, or misrepresentation of the subaltern voices. But what they also did was that scholars like Partho Chatterjee and others, they also focused on certain individuals, whether it was Mahatma Gandhi, whether it was Jawaharlal Nehru, or it was Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, and created them as subalterns, while not referring to caste, while not referring to Dalits, while not referring to women, while not referring to several other minority groups in India. So this was one of the biggest reasons for which the subaltern studies, while being quite revolutionary in the Indian context, did not represent the whole idea of India according to Aloysius. So Aloysius further argues that there was a shift in India and the shift requires that we need to understand power within culture. So, if there are Hindus, fine, but can we understand Hindus as one unit? Can we understand Adivasis as one unit? Can we understand the so-called Bahujans as one unit? Or we need to understand each one of them as separate, and how each group is bringing certain nuanced factors, certain nuanced understanding to the articulation of this nation, to the articulation of the social formation. One key argument that Aloysius makes is that in the 19th century as well as in the earlier part of 20th century, we see what he calls as dual modern awakenings. Dual modern awakenings means that there are two layers on which awakening was or modernization was being implemented. One he calls elite Brahminic revivalism. Elite Brahminic revivalism is essentially that elite or Brahminic revivalism basically means that in the earlier period we have a certain kind of Brahminism, and this Brahminism justified what needs to be done, how a king needs to lead his life, how a queen needs to lead her life, what religious formations can happen, what are the different Varna systems. As we have discussed before, the Varna system of Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras and the Panchamas. So, this is Brahminical system. So, even when we have something like Brahmo Samaj, Arya Samaj, Theosophical Society, so on and so forth, they were all asserting this top-down hierarchy. So, for example, the Brahmo Samaj was not entirely against caste system. Arya Samaj was also not against caste system, but what they did, they reinterpreted the caste system by saying that Brahmins are not born Brahmins, they are made Brahmins. Kshatriyas are not born Kshatriyas, they are made as Kshatriyas. Same goes with Vaishyas, Shudras and others. So, what we need to do here is that we need to understand caste as an occupational category or Varna as an occupational category, rather than understanding them as the hereditary or as the part or as degenerated part of Hindu society. So, at this level or the revivalism kind of level, the idea of caste was pushed aside, so that a new form of hegemonic or homogeneous form of Hinduism can be created. As a matter of fact, the same thing was happening in other religious congregations also. Muslims were doing the same thing, Sikhs were doing the same thing, Buddhists were doing the same thing, Jains were doing the same thing, that they wanted to a certain form of revivalism to happen within their own spheres of influence. But on the other side, the subaltern masses or subaltern classes in India, they wanted to have egalitarian assertions, which would be anti-caste and certain form of regional movements like the Satya Sodhak Samaj or Dravidian politics. Each one of them were anti-caste and non-Brahmin sort of movements. The reason being that when you are at the bottom of the hierarchy, whether you are a Shudra or you are a Dalit, you are subjugated under the weight of what is happening at the top without ever getting a chance to move to the upper layers. So, when they confronted or when they encountered modernity or the modernity of French Revolution or Enlightenment period of liberty, equality and fraternity, they felt that this is how nation should be. Nation is not just about giving voting rights. Nation is not just about a state. Nation is not just about electing your representatives. Nation is about feeling equality, feeling that we are one group of people. That is how Anderson is also speaking about when he speaks of nation as a community or an imagined political community. How can there be a community when this community is divided among themselves in terms of caste, in terms of different other sociological categories? So he argues that the way nation was imagined in India, it was homogenization without equality and as a form of Brahminic modernity. So that is the reason why Aloysius is not even focusing on the political or economic aspects of nation. Rather, he is looking at nation the way it took its form here as a cultural nationalism, and religion being the language of power. Religion in terms of Hindu idioms of national unity, in terms of Bharat Mata, Ram Rajya, Sanatan Dharma, so on and so forth, which essentially completely disoriented the way Indians or the way the people in India had understood themselves. So that is the reason why he argues Brahminic culture became Indian culture, which had no differences and no representation of somebody who is not following a certain kind of societal features or certain kind of hierarchy in society. So Muslims had no representation, Dalits had no representation, Adivasis had no representation in this imagination of India. So even when there was anti-colonial argument, it was about the spiritual revivalism, as we discussed about Brahmo Samaj, Arya Samaj and others. So this is where he is bringing in Mahatma Gandhi. So he's quite impressed by the way Mahatma Gandhi created ahimsa as one of the weapons, but this weapon for Aloysius had very moral constriction. Moral constriction because he is not, or Gandhi is not against caste as a hierarchical system. Yes, he had issues with untouchability, but not caste as a system per se. So, what he looked at is a paternalization of caste order. So, non-violence was there as a method was there, ahimsa was, as a method was there, but non-violence was also used in order to curtail and control the radical movements. There was in the name of village republics, several structural reforms were curtailed. So his genius was that he bridged the gap between elite and the subaltern and contained both of them. So there was mass mobilization in which lakhs and lakhs of people would participate, but there was no idea of emancipation here, because emancipation was restricted to certain form of village utopia, and anybody who happens to be part of the Shudra community or that of the list, they understand that village is not an idyllic place, because village is the place where they have always been subjugated, and that is the place where there was no anonymity of pursuing their own lives and own goals. So for Aloysius, Ambedkar comes as a breath of fresh air, because he argues that caste is anti-nation. Till the time we have caste and caste formations, we cannot call ourselves a nation. And with that, when he is identifying nation in terms of caste and this caste in terms of Hindu, so he argues that Hinduism cannot be the basis of nationalism, specifically because of its caste order. Once you remove this caste or you annihilate this caste order, he is not saying that you annihilate certain groups in this caste, order. Rather, he is saying that this order itself needs to be removed. If we want to create an egalitarian system, a democratic system, so only a Dalit movement or only a subaltern movement has real democratic potential to create something egalitarian, to create something essentially an image of a nation for India. So that is the reason why, while in 1947, according to Aloysius, we got independence, but there was no national integration. Nobody listened to Ambedkar and his movement at that time, because they all argued that let us first get our own country, let us first get independent, and then we'll discuss about what is happening or what might happen in our internal field. So 1947 we got political independence, we attained statehood, but nationalism and nation could not emerge, because whatever was being done, it was about a certain group of people, and it was highly exclusionary and centralized within the hands of certain elite groups, within the hands of certain caste elite groups. So what are the theoretical implications of this work? So in the Indian context, nationalism was understood by the ideology of the elite groups. So when it is ideology of the elite groups, so the ideology functioned on the field of culture, and a certain form of ideology became the ideology of India. So we need sociology as to why nationhood or India has nationalism without a nation, and what is this nation, this cultural nation, and how it can be done. So we have modernity without substantive democracy. We vote, but at the same time, all of us, we do not have the same representation. Only certain groups are more represented than the others. So in conclusion, he argues that we need to understand, or we need to move towards a moral sociology of the nation, in which we have to start by saying that nationhood in India is an unfinished ethical project, and we need to understand the plurality and equality within the culture or culture of nation, and take care of them so that it could be emancipatory. And any idea of nation without the subsequent idea of emancipation is incomplete. Thank you.